If I say we are all modern in being for freedom, no one is arguing against freedom. That's not good. That would really trade in the modern falsehood, which is that the ancient and medieval worlds were not for freedom. In fact, the experience of the good of freedom, of not being enslaved, for instance, is universal knowledge. And acknowledgement of the desirability of that good is apparent as far back as the Torah, as far back as Leviticus. The thing to say is this: as human beings, ancient or modern, we are all for freedom in one particular sense, the sense that I'm going to specify now. Our question is simply, what is freedom in any age? First, it is not choice. This is not a controversial or question-begging statement, just a semantic one. Choice is winding up with one of two or more options. We start out with options. We finish having selected one. What intervened, we say, is choosing. And there's no problem caused by saying this, that choosing is what we do to wind up with a choice. But here the word choosing is just a stand-in for an as yet unexplored middle. We can say that it names the particular process that human beings use to get to a choice, but we haven't yet bothered to look at any process. And to say, but the process is just choosing, is to say there's nothing to see here, like a cop who just wants to clear the scene of an accident. You find out if there's something to see by looking. So the word choosing we ought to treat as the name for any process by which something is chosen, whatever gets chosen. That does justice to the way we in fact use the word, and it can be a bad process, by which I mean a process destructive of what we are trying to do in choosing. My suggestion then is that the notion of choice doesn't get us anywhere. To get somewhere with our question, we have to look into choice. And as soon as you do that, you notice that we quite readily say things like, but it wasn't a real choice. And this gets us under the surface, into the real issue, the deep issue in choice. So to repeat, at surface level, any way you end up making a choice is in fact choosing, but you can't remain at the surface and do justice to what matters to us in choosing. There are ways of choosing that involve violations of something. The deep issue then is not choice, it is in choice. It is how we choose, the conditions of the choice. And the issue, we say, is freedom. What is it? Choice was a detour. We are back on the highway of our question. To answer this question, you have to involve some other notion than either choice or freedom. You have to identify the issue in freedom. We have to locate the thing that defines this freedom. The situations that we balk at, that we instinctively call unfree, are situations in which often there is some kind of coercion. Coercion can be making someone choose. They may not wish to choose at all, say to choose between two children, but they're made to choose. Or they do want to choose, and among the available options, they are keen to choose X. The choice they would make if they were free is X, but they're made to choose Y. Somehow they're forced. Their choosing is controlled. I'm not making any political point here. Maybe this man ought to be vaccinated. Maybe he oughtn't. Just pick the scenario that clarifies for you the issue of coercion. There is another force from outside this person causing him to choose in this unwanted way. Causing this how? The person is threatened with a fine, a punishment, if he chooses what he desires to choose. Or, third, that outside agent, whoever it is, say some anonymous government official, could usurp your place, to make a decision that is rightfully yours. For instance, you request information about something concerning you, and some functionary imposes his department's own interests and denies your request, it's not his business to do that, to replace your interests, which are actually serious, with his, which are irrelevant. We appear to have a conclusion. In all three cases, the person who should choose is replaced with the one who should not. Freedom is avoiding that disorder. The issue then, it appears, is in fact causation. Interference in the cause of a free choice. The issue appears to be the imposition of an outside will, a will other than the person's own will. It is the replacement of wills, the right one replaced with any other will, any will other than the appropriate will. The issue that defines your freedom is, are you the one causing the choice? Is it your will that is acting to make this choice, to cause that arrival at one option? Now, we certainly might want to ask more questions about this, but we haven't the time for that. So for our purposes, let's just rely on the sense that this is the direction we're inclined to take on this question. And I will say we're all moved to take, an ancient person no less than a modern person, as I will show you. This is the issue in freedom. Are you free to choose? Is a question that asks, are you the one causing the choice? Your preference might be not to choose. Not choosing would be your choice. Or are you being caused to choose some unwanted option by some other agent who's being wrongly injected into the situation? Is your agency being taken away? This seems a good clarification of what we mean by a free choice. It tells us something particular about free choice. It explains who the agent of a free choice is. We were looking for the issue in the free choice, and have we not found it? The issue is the one who makes the choice, the agent of the choice, the cause of the free choice. Now, let me give you the classical understanding of what we have just said. Freedom, as we have just defined it, is very often called negative freedom. And negative freedom is treated as the modern view of freedom. For instance, here's Isaiah Berlin explaining what he called the notion of negative freedom. I am normally said to be free to the degree to which no man or body of men interferes with my activity. Political liberty in this sense is simply the area in which a man can act unobstructed by others. An action is a thing you choose from among all the options of action a person could choose. All the things he or she can imagine to do. The mind presenting kind of magazine rack of possible actions. This is the meaning of freedom that we arrived at a minute ago, speaking about coercion. And I want now to show you how this indeed belongs to, note that, belongs to the classical understanding of freedom. By classical, I mean the outlook on freedom that was worked out a long way back in ancient Greece, and that was embraced in the Christian Middle Ages because it was compatible with the Christian and Jewish outlooks. The issues here were studied by Socrates and Plato and then powerfully set out by Aristotle in 4 points, medieval Aristotle. I'm calling it the classical understanding because that is what it is. The idea of the classical, a Western idea itself, is the affirmation that there are some things that are timeless and can speak to people of every age. Hans-Georg Gadamer, speaking about art, remarks on the fundamentally unlimited power of certain works of art to speak directly through the ages. This account of whatever we're talking about is not culture-bound. What was recognized in antiquity has continuing validity, and in this enduring validity, we might add, this account that I will lay out has the potential to define a culture that is faithful to this affirmation about reality. So a few minutes ago, the thing that we established as central to freedom was the issue of proper agency or cause. You want to be the chooser, the choice maker, the actual initiating agent of the choice, not the manipulated puppet. And when I say we're talking about the proper cause or proper agent of a free choice, I just mean the one appropriate to that kind of choice, the one you need. For a moment, however, just forget about freedom. That point, I said, fits into something bigger from the classical understanding of things. And here it is. As I set out this larger framework, there will not at first seem to be any connection with freedom. But at a certain point, I predict you're going to think, oh, there it is. That's what we were just talking about. It's a part of this larger description. The topic now is the classical understanding of the entire world, things in this world, among them us. We want to understand things, and most especially ourselves. Let me summarize this overarching insight into things in 4 points about what. We'll see what in a moment. Here is Mortimer Adler on Aristotle's view of what is usually called the 4 causes, or much better, the answers that Aristotle gives to 4 questions that can and should be asked about the changes with which we are acquainted in our common experience. The phenomenon at issue here, Aristotle says, is changes. We should understand, if we can, the changes with which we are acquainted in our common experience. And consider, is there in that a slight connection to what we were talking about, free choice? Isn't choosing a change, going from available options to one, which is chosen from among them? But let's continue. Adler shows by his quotation marks that these points are called the 4 causes, but Adler really wants to shift back to Aristotle, which is wise. It so happens that the expression 4 causes is not a translation of Aristotle. It comes from the scholars, and it carries modern baggage. Adler mentions that label, but then shifts to what this is really about. So follow his lead and do all you can not to pick up the baggage, not to start thinking about how these could be causes, because the actual issue here is much simpler. Adler says that there are 4 questions that we can ask, and indeed should ask, about changes. They are common sense questions, he says, and so are the answers. Here are the 4 questions. And to make them clear, we can illustrate by asking these questions about the act of making. When you make something, there is a change. And let's think about not the making of a choice, but the making of a concrete thing. Let's keep this as basic and so as clear as we possibly can. The thing that we might want to make might be a shoe. For us to do that, or produce some other kind of thing, like a choice, say, ordering from the menu, the basic questions are the same, but let's just look at shoemaking. My final warning. When Adler gives names to these 4 questions, he uses the scholars' labels, which include the word cause. As I said, Aristotle did not come up with these terms. They are all English translations of the Latin labels assigned by medieval scholastics. But again, ignore these. Thinking about how these could all be causes will be a huge red herring. Just pay attention to the questions and to their unavoidability. The first question about any human production is, what is it going to be made of? This is the material cause of the production. The second question is, who made it? The maker is the efficient cause of the production. The third question is, what is it that is being made? Aristotle called the answer to this question the formal cause of the change or production. Why call it formal? The answer to the question, what is it that is being made, gives us the form of the shoe, not a shoe. That is, it is a general form, the form of a genus named shoes. You see then that it's not a form in the sense of a shape, as shoes have different shapes, but rather in the sense of the components that form a shoe: a sole, a space for the foot, an upper that somehow attaches the shoe to the foot. And finally, the fourth question is, what is it being made for? What purpose is it intended to fulfill? In its simplest form, the question is, why is it being made? And the answer with regard to the productions we've been talking about comes quickly. We all know what shoes are for, what function they perform, or what purpose they serve. This Aristotle called the final cause, calling it that because the factor being referred to is an end in view. End in the sense of a completion, but also a goal. It has both senses in Greek. If you think about this, you realize that in all of this, what Aristotle is talking about is how we understand what is going on in actions like making, where there is a change from no thing to the made thing, no shoe to shoe. And notice that here again, we're talking about actions, understanding our own actions. We understand that act of making by answering these four questions. And can I not say, conversely, that we do not understand such actions, our actions of producing, until these four questions are answered? Now, you recall that this is all a way of understanding change. You understand that the answers to these questions fill in four blanks with regard to change. What primarily might be the kind of change that Aristotle is concerned with. We've been looking at the change that is making, shoemaking. A different example given by Aristotle is treating a person who is ill. But actually, Aristotle's example is not treating, but change. It is change that interests Aristotle, and some treatments affect no change. And there are also treatments that accidentally kill the patient. We have good reason to think that it is one kind of change above all that Aristotle is intent on understanding. In medicine, we have the change that interests him only when the patient improves. And this, by the way, is why Aristotle calls medicine the art of healing. It is that particular kind of change that medicine always aims at. Well, what's the major category here within which we find all of these different kinds of action? Medicine, shoemaking, building, strategy, economics, all mentioned by Aristotle. And think also of the choosing that goes on within every one of them. It is the generation of something good. It's not just any kind of change. Aristotle is helping us to understand productive change itself. You might think to say that this is adaptable to bad change too, in that there's also a form of the bad thing, a bad treatment, say. But that bad treatment turns out to be the failure to achieve the end that we're talking about here. The issue is really good change. Why does Aristotle examine this? It is obvious, so that we can have this productive change in every domain of life. His inquiry here is about the genesis of a good that human acts can inject into life. He's attempting to specify four necessary conditions of desired change to the end of flourishing. Human flourishing, or eudaimonia. These four conditions, he's saying, constitute knowledge of how to manage living, of how to thrive. So, to sum this up, the claim, taken to be an enduring insight, is that there is an ordered cosmos. Well, that's a redundancy. Cosmos in ancient Greek meant order, and the world has an order. And a part of this order is the nature of things, a nature that is broken into different aspects. To obtain the most basic understanding even, it seems, of a thing, not just a change, you answer these four basic questions. But notice what we are talking about. These answers are conditions of a thing's existence. Its genesis. I don't mean the process of its genesis, but just what it means for a thing to come into being. It will be made of something. It will be made by someone, or something will make it. It will have some distinctive form, and it will be made for something. The real issue in all of this is Genesis. When Aristotle states that this is the explanation of change, he means, especially as we saw, productive change. That is, the change that produces something good. This is precisely the kind of change that we are told of in Genesis 1, bringing some good thing into being. There is much to ask about what can be meant by good in Genesis 1. It does not mean useful to man, for instance. But we don't need to plumb that here. What is relevant to us is that the world is a container of things with this fourfold nature. And that insight is powerful because what it allows us to do is to participate in the genesis of things by use of the understanding we have been discussing, by acting on the basis of that understanding. If this seems a novel suggestion to us, it was fully understood as long ago as the time of Moses. When in Exodus 35, on the construction of the tabernacle, work entrusted to a craftsman named Bezalel, we read the following: "The Lord hath filled him with the Spirit of God, in wisdom, in understanding, and in knowledge, and all manner of workmanship, to design artistic works." It directly names the powers by which God was said to have created the world. In the book of Proverbs, for example, we can read that the Lord by wisdom, Okmah, hath founded the earth. By understanding hath he established the heavens. By his knowledge the depths are broken up and the clouds drop down the dew. That is, it is by understanding that God created the world. These powers are the tools, God's own work, which was, after creating out of nothing, no human being creates out of nothing, work of forming. And by the exact same set of powers, wisdom, understanding, knowledge, man also brings good things into existence. Generating desired things is work that not just artists do, it is what all human beings do. In Exodus, we read about every wise-hearted man in whom the Lord put wisdom and understanding to know how to work all manner of work for the service here of the sanctuary. All work of bringing good things into existence, all the activities discussed by Aristotle, which generate statuary by the art of sculpture, healing by medicine, traveling by shipbuilding, victory over enemies by strategy, wealth by economics. This, Aristotle understood, was a matter of understanding. And the ancient Hebrews saw such wisdom and knowledge as a power bestowed on man that would allow him to perpetuate in his own life the genesis of good things that we read about in Genesis 1. God gave men this power of understanding, this power of generation. Now, I said that the four causes are not causes because cause, as we understand this, is one of the four conditions. The good thing comes only from that maker or causal agent that is equipped to produce it. I said that I would return to the translation problem, or maybe I didn't. In any case, now is a good moment for this. The word that Aristotle uses, which is so often translated as cause, is aetion. Notice that the word etiology comes from this. My claim is not that this cannot be translated cause. That is not the translator's question. The question is, what does the word mean here? Whatever its mundane meaning. That won't do in Aristotle's discussion, which is not typical. This word really must be translated to suit his actual subject, which is etiology, as Genesis. The conditions that are fulfilled in bringing something about. That is, this term does not point at agency. One of the four components does that. It is the name of the whole unified explanation of how positive change comes about, brings something good into being. The first book of the Bible is not called God. After the causal agent, it's called Genesis. And it explains what took place to bring the world about, which involved God. We have all this time been discussing the four necessary conditions of Genesis, the generation of what is good. To deliver its own good in being itself, that thing must be made of the proper material, and proper just means appropriate to. To have a statue, you must use the kind of material that is appropriate to a statue, made by the proper maker, the one suited to producing this particular product, made in the proper form. You cannot leave out properties that define this thing, or you're not producing that thing. Nutrition, say, in the food you produce to heal the sick. And that thing must be fit to serve that thing's end. If you have satisfied these other conditions, but the shoe you make falls off the foot, then you have not generated the good of shoemaking. There's one last thing to note before we can return to our primary topic. How is it decided what the proper material is, and who the proper maker is, and what the essential form of a given thing is, and what the end is that the thing must be fit to serve when you produce it? You can see that this is a big subject and that there's plenty of potential for argument about these things. We needn't get into this at all, except to say that these are questions decided by wisdom, understanding, knowledge, by giving attention to these issues and all that they involve. This is a formula exhibiting the cause of a thing's existence, a formula that we can use to make things exist. That is, the generation of good involves careful and insightful thinking about every one of these four things. And so you see the point of what Aristotle is doing. He's explaining how we can obtain those desirable things that it is within our power to produce, if we follow what we know about this. To manage your life productively in every kind of action, shoemaking, healing, grocery shopping, you're after something marked out by four necessary conditions. And do not think that we can have these without satisfying all four conditions: the matter, the form, the end, and the agent. It is a famous distinction, says this scholar. Why? I say, because this allowed the civilization built with this understanding to obtain what it called good These 4 questions told us, all through the age, when this basic lesson remained fundamental knowledge, meaning knowledge on which basis to produce desirable things. What conditions we must satisfy to bring those good things into being. In any area, we must answer what the proper material is for a roof that does the job of a roof, for a meal that serves the end of restoration. And this will require an effort of thinking involved with experience, employing reasoning. The 4 questions must be answered to generate the desired good. Who the proper maker is, for instance, who is fit to deliver a treatment, who can be hired as a doctor, and so on, through all the 4 questions. And just to visualize this obligation, that to bring about good changes and not bad change, a society must do this thinking. Let's picture each question as a question handed to a counselor in the employ of your nation or city or household. Imagine 4 people hired to do the work required to answer them, each looking after one of the 4 questions. And it is collaborative work. You don't appoint one person. One person might skip over one of the questions. You get 4 people to get all 4 answers. Now, I doubt it is clear how this relates to our actual question about freedom. But when we continue, I believe you will see, in fact, what happens when a society starts behaving as if this knowledge, once considered fundamental, for reasons I have just explained, can be ignored. Thinkers in our tradition, East and West, accepted this explanation. It was taught by Basil the Great, Boethius, Moses Maimonides, Thomas Aquinas. It endures into the 18th century, taught by Isaac Watts, Scottish Enlightenment, Thomas Reid. But professors of philosophy today teach what they call Aristotle's theory of causes, only not because it has any practical significance. Indeed, that it could have any practical significance is routinely ignored. It is just taught as a distinctive Aristotelian doctrine. So far, I have not done much more, except to insist that this is practical, that there's no gulf between theory and practice. What practical significance these questions could have will not yet be clear, but when we continue, I hope to cross that boundary into quite serious consequences. And here's a question we must answer. How did a society entirely oriented in the manner of Aristotle and those who acquired this understanding from him, through him, a society oriented to transcendent reality in its understanding of telos, purpose, come to endorse a nihilist's understanding of freedom while not becoming nihilists in any overt way? People once accepted that our society is looked after if, in effect, each of these characters you see here performs and answers the critical question that he or she is charged to answer in every activity, so as to get that condition into the changes that are the acts of the people. Get them all into the actions, the changes wrought by these people, and all that activity will be, so far as knowledge can reach, productive change. This is an essential formula of the attainment of benefits, but I really mean good things, like pottery, healing, wealth. And freedom is one of these things. Satisfy these conditions, and the effect of that activity, of the things done, will be flourishing. You will have the best chance you can of producing actual healing, real food, generating real freedom. And that is what we will move to next.